you run your own freelance business? Or maybe you're thinking about picking up some business on the side? Well, then you need FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the quickest and easiest way to get invoices out to your clients. It's easy to use. It works anywhere, available from any device on the desktop, iPhone, iPad, Android, and all of your data is backed up and secure. And it makes it really easy to get organized and get paid. You'll be tracking time, logging expenses, and invoicing your clients in no time. You can also save time billing, freeing up several days per month to focus on the work that you love, and you get paid faster. FreshBooks customers are paid on average 5 days faster because there's a link on the invoice that says pay me now. And it's a great way to grow your business. Plus, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day trial. That's right, 30-day trial if you try them out. So go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Once again, for a 30-day trial, go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Freelancer Show. This week on our panel, we have Jonathan Stark.
Hello.
And Jeremy Green.
Hi.
And our special guest this week is Eric Dietrich.
Hello.
Or Dietrich. Dietrich, now that I've introduced you, did I get that wrong? Is it Dietrich?
It is Dietrich.
Okay, very good. And I'll at least try to pronounce my name correctly, Reuven Lerner. And everyone else mispronounces and misspells it, so it's only fair. And this week we're going to be speaking with Eric about the future of labor. So, Eric, why don't you introduce yourself for our audience so they can know with whom we will be sparring/discussing.
Sure. My name's Erik Dietrich, and I have been, I followed sort of a traditional software development path up through the ranks and eventually became an executive. And then I got tired of that. And in a move that a lot of people would have thought maybe was a little bit crazy, I decided to leave an executive role, go off on my own and become a consultant. So I have a number of years of solo consulting under my belt. These days, I run a digital content marketing agency aimed at tech firms, and I still do some consulting, but not as much of that. And speaking specifically about what we're talking about here, during the course of all of this, wrapping it up about a year ago, I wrote a book about software development and the future of labor, specifically knowledge work. And so that's what brings us to the moment here in discussing this topic.
Excellent.
So if you read newspapers, magazines, predictions, and so forth, the assumption is, software is eating the world. And so, as they say, or as Mark Andreessen says, and so we're going to need more people to write software, and more people to write software means everything is just hunky-dory for people who know how to write software. So my impression is you have a slightly different take on that.
I certainly am inclined, based on what I'm seeing, to agree with the idea that the demand for software is just, constantly running at an all-time high, it seems like, especially given the consulting that I've done in enterprises, which has been a lot of the focus over the last 3-4 years. They are eternally having trouble hiring software developers. So I certainly think that you're going to continue to see a lot of demand for software development. I do think that you see the enterprises in a way that often hurts them try to commodify that labor. Well, knowledge work is what I think of it as, but kind of commodify it and turn it into labor. So it gets a little interesting in that I think at times they're demanding something that doesn't or shouldn't exist in the way that they think it does. But all that is to say, I don't see anything to suggest, at least based on my travels, that software will stop eating the world in the near future.
Definitely agree on that. I like the distinction that you're making between labor and knowledge work. And I don't honestly know what the technical definition of labor is, but I always picture it as more manual of a process. Not that typing's not manual, but you know what I mean? Like factory labor, and I'm sure the U.S. government has a very specific definition of the word labor. And I imagine from my sort of experience coming at this world from the pricing standpoint and hourly billing, that it's a kind of offshoot or a grandchild of scientific management and trying to turn the sort of Henry Ford assembly line model into something that works in a knowledge economy, which to me just seems like a terrible fit.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. And in fact, it's interesting that you mentioned scientific management and Taylor. I talked a good bit about that in my book. And so I admittedly don't know probably the dictionary definition of labor either, but you're absolutely right. I was drawing a distinction there in the scientific management sense of labor being where you try to separate the thinking from the doing. And what I've seen over a lot of the years in working with these enterprises is that there tends to be this desire to keep going with that, even when it made sense for physical manufacturing labor, but not for something like programming or something that requires generally knowledge work. You can't really meaningfully separate the thinking from the doing, and yet that's still kind of how these firms operate. So one of the reasons I see kind of this exodus coming over the next number of years is that they can't seem to wrap their collective brains around that, and it creates a pretty unpleasant work environment that tends to make it hard for them to hire, even as they have money to pay and there's a lot of demand.
So, Eric, I'm thinking that this attempt to separate kind of the thinking from the doing in these enterprises probably often manifests itself in the types of structures where you have like the software architects that pick the technologies that are going to be used, dictate coding styles, kind of try to dictate everything that's going to happen and then pass off a set of specifications to people that are, quote unquote, lower down the chain to implement. Is that accurate? And are there other ways that happens?
That is absolutely accurate. You see a lot of that. I think perhaps the idea of the software architect, the genesis of that is maybe the most emblematic thing of what we're discussing here, where you have this sort of experienced software professional that's going to do the heavy lifting when it comes to thinking, and then the line level software developer, or whatever you want to call it, is just kind of taking those structures and turning them into reality. And I've actually seen, depending on the particular enterprise and group, I've seen even more extreme versions of that, where you have this hierarchy of people even below the architect, where by the time it gets to the person who's writing code, you've stubbed out every single method and the parameters and the return values and all of that. It really trying to turn it into paint by numbers with these elaborate matrix systems and a lot of people that maybe don't need to even be involved. So that's, yes, absolutely. I would say if you're trying to relate and you haven't seen these sort of structures, the architect to developer paradigm is a good example.
How is that different from, and I'm sure there are differences, so I'm really asking her, like, from, let's say, an in-house legal team where, like, the head lawyer says, well, here's the strategy we're going to pursue, and basically dictates to the lower level lawyer what to do, and the lower level lawyer more or less just follows the directions. Granted, has to do some research and work, but they're really doing a lot of grunt work, albeit high-paid grunt work.
So I think that's an interesting point of discussion, because I imagine that there are certainly some similarities. In terms of the difference, say the way that goes, it's hard for, I do some comparison in the book of what I see the future being to software developers banding together and behaving perhaps more like partnership-based legal firms. In terms of the internals of a firm that has partners and junior partners and then associates and all that, there may be some similarities. But let's see. I don't know that I would. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't see it the same. I don't see the law. I don't see the parallel as much. Like, the law firm to me is a firm. It's not like I suppose giant law firms exist, but to me, it's more like the apprentice model, which is not what's happening inside of corporate. So, like, in corporate, the development team is not like the core competency of the organization. So, like, when I worked, my one corporate job, I was at Staples, and I was in IT at Staples in the advertising department, but I was a cost. I was not, we were not building some software that was going to be like a customer face. I mean, it wasn't really customer facing. In some cases, I guess it was, but it wasn't like a core thing. Like, we sold staplers, and it wasn't any. There was very little upward mobility. Really, there wasn't much of a like if you wanted to go way up to the highest levels of this company, you didn't do it in IT. So to me, the law firm parallel is more like the agency model on the developer side. It's closer to that. It's like an apprentice thing where, from the studio of Michelangelo, well, he didn't paint everything. He had a bunch of people who would paint stuff in that style, and they would sort of learn by doing. It was more of a community of practice, where in the corporate world, it's just like, hey, soldiers, get some stuff done for me. Just creative execution, like go type this stuff up for us.
Well, that's why I was asking about a corporate legal department rather than like a law practice. Because I agree, I think in many ways, software engineers could benefit from the same sort of structure or similar structure to what accountants and lawyers do in terms of their large partnerships and so forth. But I'm curious, inside of a company, you often have a legal team. And maybe that's a bad idea. Maybe companies shouldn't have an internal legal team and they'd be better served by having the external one. But I'm curious to know how that is similar, because I assume in a corporate legal team, I've never been a lawyer, but I assume there, the head lawyer says, this is what we're going to do. And the lower level grunts are just sort of required to do it.
Oh, I could be wrong about this, but my understanding of the way that an in-house legal department works is that I think that's fairly flat, and that you've got these lawyers that are staff, but then what they wind up doing is going out to actual law firms that specialize, depending on what they need. That the in-house legal team, depending on the organization anyway, is sort of a point of contact. They're almost generalists that know how to find the specialists. That may not be the case at, say, if you've got a company that's real estate specific, there may be differences out there, but that's always been my impression of how these large enterprises work with their legal staff.
That's not a bad analogy for how it could be done, actually.
Yeah, actually. And so in the book, that's kind of that's one of the things that I talk about, that I see if this exodus happens, it's not that firms where IT is a cost center are going to just stop having anything IT related. That couldn't happen, or that they would stop having software development. But I see that you'll have maybe more and more a role that's some kind of knowledgeable software generalist, perhaps project manager-ish. And that person knows how to go out and find agency app dev firms that are well suited to the work that needs to happen.
Yeah, I have a friend who basically built a company on this exact belief, which is that it will be impossible for big companies to attract any kind of good talent internally, because what kind of software developer wants to go work for 3M, like printing labels? They just don't. They're not going to move to some place in the middle of nowhere and go, commute into work and sit in a cube all day. They just won't do it. Mm-hmm. So, and the ones that will are not the ones you want. So what's the, and so my friend's whole premise is that these large organizations that can't attract the talent, and I think we've all seen, I've certainly seen companies who are just, like you said, constantly in this state of trying to hire developers, and they can't. There's always positions open, and the demand is really high. So my friend's theory or his premise is that they will never be able to hire them, and that they will always need, or the need will increase, that they will have to go out to these software partners that have really talented people that understand, the sort of beekeeper mentality of how to keep developers happy, and can attract that talent, and then engage with someone inside of the organization, like a product owner or some sort of advocate at a relatively high level, at a strategic level, and then, identify what the desired outcomes are, and then just sort of execute it almost as a black box. And then, they get the result that they want, but they're not really that involved there's no way to micromanage it, which is what seems to, in my limited experience in corporate, that was what you'd get. The sort of, like you said, the stubbed out, here are the stubbed out, here's this waterfall spec, basically, just go finish it up.
Mm-hmm. How's how's that firm doing?
Great.
Yeah, I can imagine the rationale there definitely resonates with me and my experience in dealing with these firms. I've dealt with them a lot on sort of the strategy management consulting end, helping them build org charts and set up hiring processes and trying to attract talent. And one of the things that's really frustrating for the people there is the constraints that they face. A big one is that you've got this heavy, very weighty in a pyramid-shaped corporation amount of salaries for the leadership and executive levels. So it's not like a small firm where if you want to hire a software developer and your budget for that is $100,000 a year in salary and you're not finding anyone, you can just kind of crank that up by 10,000. You can't do that at these firms because you've got all these, structured management salaries. So that's perhaps the most straightforward example, but it's also things like trying to get around certain legal policies related to open source or the dress code. And so you've got these hiring authorities that want to do away with all that stuff to make it easier for them to hire, and they can't. And so they have to go to the job market, with this description for a job that they know just won't attract people. And so a lot of them do. They wind up figuring out ways to either bring in contractors or to deal with firms.
Mm-hmm.
So, Eric, you're not just so I can better understand this. You're not saying programmers are going to leave big companies. You're saying they're going to leave big non-tech companies. Like basically, so if you have like I don't know an IBM, they might stay there because it's a technical company and they reward like they understand technology. But I don't know a supermarket chain, right, where they need IT, they're not a good place for a developer to be because they're not going to value the IT department and the computer people. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, absolutely.
Or do you think IBM's out of business too?
I mean, I think there will be a spectrum, at least based on the enterprises that I've seen. If you look at, there are some big, I think of it sometimes on my blog, I'll call it enterprise Silicon Valley. There are big firms, like Google or Microsoft that are certainly enterprises. But I don't think that they'll have trouble keeping software developers. That's their bread and butter. When I think of the firms that are going to struggle, it's, governmental firms, banks, major retailers, manufacturers, that sort of thing. And then there's probably some organizations that are in the middle. I can't say why exactly, but IBM strikes me as maybe not quite as easy a time keeping developers as, say, Google or Microsoft, but wouldn't struggle the way that banks might. I don't know a lot directly about IBM. That's just kind of a feel I have. But yeah, that's the gist of it, that I think you're going to see these firms that have historically treated IT as a cost center just sort of more and more give up on trying to staff those positions, and your talented software developers aren't going to go there anyway. So I think more and more, in line with, I guess, what's called the gig economy, I think you're going to have these small firms that form to deal with them, maybe solo contractors, but I think they'll kind of clump together into firms. And I've even seen evidence of that just in my time there, where people literally leave those companies and then turn around and contract to them.
Right.
Yeah, I've seen that plenty of times too.
Yeah.
I know when I was working at HP, and again, it's like a technical company, but there was a lot of worry about how they weren't compensating basically technical people tried to move up in the ranks and they hit a wall where if you wanted to make more money, well, too bad. It's sort of like what you're saying, what you said about these. You hit a ceiling in terms of how much you can make because you're just not core to what the company's doing. And even though HP was and is a technical company, it still was the case where if you wanted to make more money, you're going to have to go into management or marketing or something like that. And so they created this separate track where you could make more money and they would sort of, value you still if you're on the engineering track. But I don't know if that really, first of all, there's a very limited number of people who could do that. And secondly, I don't think they really were compensated in the same way. But I find it hard to imagine that large non-tech companies would even see this as an issue, let alone do it. Yeah,
you might get individuals in middle management that read about that somewhere and try to implement it. But in these large companies, that's going to be a real uphill battle that'll probably die in various committees before it even gets started. So I think of that as the distinguished software developer track, or whatever you want to call that.
Yeah.
I think it's a great thing to do, but in some ways I think it kind of punts the economic problem just a little bit. I don't exactly know what they pay these folks or where they top out, but what I'm assuming is it kind of gives you this escape valve that lets you get around having engineers only have line level salaries, and maybe it lets you have them compete with the manager, but they're still going to top out somewhere.
Right.
Speaking of banks, I saw a definite trend working with credit unions where really virtually all of their core IT systems were outsourced to third parties, or basically, like SaaS type businesses like Fiserv. I think Fiserv is one of the biggest software companies in the world. I think it's in the top 5. And just a monster, like a massive company compared to any of their customers, which it started.
Who are they?
Fiserv.
Fiserv. I've never heard of them.
Yeah, it's. I'm pretty. Last time I checked, I am pretty sure that they are in the top 5 globally. And yeah, you never heard of them because they just do these sort of back office IT, like check processing and ACH transfers and all of that. They take all of that they sort of mitigate that risk for the individual credit unions in my case, and they have these massive systems that a credit union could never manage on their own at this point. And really that seems like it seems like that trend makes sense. It makes sense that they would do that, kind of outsource their back office IT. But there's this, it just feels like a dead end to me, because then how do you differentiate yourself from the community bank across the street? If you're both using Fiserv, it's like you are both limited by you both have the same limitations. So they end up competing on price, like fees or loan rates or whatever. It becomes like sort of a curse almost. But there's another thing that comes up, and I'm curious what Eric thinks about this. So traditionally, I'm going to be 50 this year. So back in the day, IT was solely a back office operation. It was for accounting and operations and perhaps supply chain, but it was all internal applications that were used by employees, and nothing really was customer facing. So, people would, whatever, like a sandwich at Burger King or something, you'd go in, you just deal directly with people. And it really wasn't any software that the end user, the customer, was actually interacting with. Then when desktop became big and now mobile has just completely eclipsed that, now there's this customer facing, they'll call it like a, mobile channel. I don't see it like that, but that's the term. It's like, oh, now there's this mobile channel, and it's like it's a directly customer facing retail IT situation. And it's been my experience that people who came up in that sort of back in the day when the IT department was these guys who worked in the basement and made sure the checks would process are not well suited at all for the kind of software engineering and development and design that needs to take place to impress somebody, a J. Crew shopper, with their mobile application. It's just a complete, people are like, oh, well, you're all geeks. No, it's completely different skill sets. So they just don't make the transition very well.
Yeah, that's certainly the truth. I did a lot of research about the history of the corporation and IT specifically for my book. And I remember my dad, who was in finance all his career, talking about how initially IT groups tended to report to the CFO for exactly those reasons. And that's kind of, you might even find the occasional firm where that's still true today. But yeah, it's one of the things that I talk about, the book that I've written is rather lengthy. And one of the things that I talk about in it is the need to develop a different sort of skill set. So in this world where you're going to have a lot of software developers moving out of the cubicle and I guess in that sense sort of anonymity in which they toil away. And if they're going to be in these firms, these smaller firms that get contracted with, it's kind of a surface area thing where those small firms, you have a lot of surface area. So you're going to need a different set of skills. Part of that's going to be business skills, because one of the things that I see going forward as you have these, small firms is that I would like to, and I think they will kind of operate more like law firms, where instead of, you wouldn't get a bunch of software developers in one of these that get together and hire someone to like manage and then VP over them. So you're going to delegate those tasks. If you have like project management and certain types of things, you're going to hire people on in order to do that. And so I think that there's a lot of dovetailing there with the idea of having the skill set necessary to help your clients, say if you're developing these mobile channels, to help your clients with their customers, perhaps deal with some of that support. I don't know exactly what those relationships look like, but yeah, absolutely. I think that you're going to see less and less as the years goes by of this idea that I can just kind of sit around and look at bits and bytes all day and not do anything besides that. Not that it'll go away entirely, but I think you'll see fewer people doing that.
Oh, that's an interesting thought. I know plenty of developers whose kind of attitude is, I want to sit in my cave and code, and I don't want to talk to absolutely anybody. And like what you're saying kind of makes me think that's really a relic of kind of how things have been done previously, and may not, may be less of a kind of constant internal state for people than I may have assumed previously.
Yeah, I think, number one, I think that's sort of, as you say, a relic. And I also think it's self-defeating. One of the things I talk about a lot is, look, for me personally, I love days where I sit around and do nothing but code. I'm an introvert by personality, so that's great. But I also see how much I'm leaving on the table if I, in essence, go to a company and say, I just want to code. I don't want to worry about anything else. They say, well, okay, there's a lot more to business than that. So if that's all you want to worry about, we're going to pay you accordingly. So I think if people get more and more clued into how much better they can do economically and just in terms of having autonomy, they'll kind of make that jump and maybe give up this idea of I just want to sit in my cave.
Yeah, and that also, limits your ability to solve problems, because if you're of that mindset that I just want to sit in my cave and code, they're probably not going to bring problems to you and ask you to solve them. They're going to bring a set of steps to you and ask you to implement them. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, this is what I talk about all day long. It's like, if you just want to sit in your basement and code, go get a job. Freelancer. I think a lot of freelancers will sort of, either get fired or they'll quit, or they get fed up or whatever. And they go out and like, hey, I developed this skill somehow, either in my free time or at this job. I want to go out and start charging by the hour for it because I've been underpaid at work. And they do that, whether it's, for financial reasons or, like you say, autonomy. They're sick of commuting or sick of the dress code or sick of the cube, whatever it is. They go out and they're just like, oh, I'm just going to keep doing what I was doing before. I sit at my desk and I get work from clients now instead of from my boss, and I'll just execute it and give it back to them. And it's like, no, you're not an employee anymore. You are a business owner now. You're an entrepreneur, for crying out loud. And there are, just like there are good and bad ways, or, safe and dangerous ways to build, I don't know, an iOS app. There's a safe and dangerous way to build a business, which is what they have suddenly, perhaps by default, without even thinking about it, have done. They've started a business and with zero business skills. So, that's literally the void that's the gap I'm trying to personally cross in my work, like that, getting some business skills to those people so they're not leaving so much money on the table. Because you're 100% right. It's just like, okay, if you just want to take orders, then here's some orders, but you're almost everybody. That's pretty broad, but so many people could be doing so much better for themselves and for their clients if they would step up a little bit, take some responsibility, and, come out of the cave and actually talk to the people on a business level and be like, well, okay, I see these are the things that you want me to do. That's great. I can do these. But let's get at what you're hoping to achieve with this stuff. I know you're not just giving me money for fun. Let's see if we can develop some sort of a business outcome here and make sure that these steps that you've assigned to me or that you want me to do for you are actually going to achieve something desirable to your business.
When you start a new project, typically you need things like a domain name, hosting, things like that. When I choose hosting, I pick mine for the options it gives. I like to know what I'm getting and set things up just how I like them. This is why, for your projects, you should check out Linode. Linode servers feature native SSD storage, a 40 gigabyte network, and Intel E5 processors. That's all the power you need to run VMs under full control, or Docker containers, who doesn't love that, encrypted disks, and VPNs. Plus, they have 10 data centers across the world and add-ons like backups, Node Balancer, and Longview to help you control your server costs. They also offer block storage for your static files, and you can get started with a $20 credit if you use the code Freelancer Show 2018. That credit is good for 4 months on their 1 gigabyte server. That's a lot of time to try them out and see if they're the right fit for you. That code again is Freelancer Show 2018. Also, if you're interested in working for Linode, they're hiring. Head to linode.com/careers to see their available positions.
Yeah, absolutely. With what you were talking about there, one of the things that I see a lot in people that write into me who have read the book or who read my blog will sort of ask for advice in these situations. You know, I'm a freelancer, I'm a contractor, and I have this situation. And then what they lay out to me sounds identical to having a W-2 salaried position in essence. I have this client, it's an open-ended thing that's going on for 2 years, and I'm unhappy and I'm thinking about leaving. And the thing I try to impress upon people is what you're describing is a job, whether they pay you as a 1099 or a W-2. And, you know, that's sort of academic. If it's open-ended and you're hourly, and you have no other clients in sight and you're not thinking about that, like, there's really not a lot of difference there.
Yeah, except you don't have health insurance.
Right. So what can and should developers do to take advantage of this? Like, let's assume your vision of the future is accurate. So like, well, what should they do? What skills should they learn? How should they aim to be freelancers? Should they set up businesses? Should they set up partnerships? Should they read your book?
Well, yeah, and certainly wouldn't discourage anyone from reading the book. Over the course of time in writing it, and then since, as people read it, I've kind of coalesced into giving some advice. Anybody who thinks they might be interested, especially depending on the state, I've been saying, go ahead and set up, some kind of LLC. Your filing fees probably aren't that expensive. It probably gets you enough tax breaks that it almost is budget neutral, even if you don't generate revenue through it. And it's worth the experience. And then another thing that I say is, in your salary job, like if you're looking to go off on your own eventually, or if you think that might be a goal, start to understand the fundamentals of a business, things like sales, account management, operations, finance, not at any kind of deep level, but enough. What would this look like if I were a contractor instead of an employee? Who would I send invoices to? How does invoicing work? I recommend to anybody to start learning that. And one of the big premises in the book that I talk about advice-wise is start to think of yourself in your corporation, not as a member of the team, but as a corporation of one dealing with a client instead of employee with employer. And that starts to do some interesting things in your mind, including making the gears turn about, well, how would I get paid and how would I bill? And why is anyone paying me? You start to ask a lot of questions, and that starts to, in turn, I think, naturally teach you some things about business.
I love that. Yeah, that's super cool. It reminds me of advice I give to people when they are already out on their own and they have this kind of, like you described, this open-ended hourly engagement with one whale client. They basically are a low-paid employee, and they're doing basically support type work, maybe a little bit of implementation, maybe a little bit of creative execution, but they're basically mopping floors and fixing doorknobs, and in the digital sense. So, and I'm always trying to impress upon these people, like what the way to increase your fees and therefore your income is to do work that's more valuable to the client than the work that you're doing now. The work that you're doing now might seem super important, but it's maintenance work basically. So, and maybe you're building a few things here and there, but it's not the highest level that you could engage with. A higher level would be to help them design things. So design the future. Instead of being told what the future is going to look like, here, can you go implement it? And once you implement it, can you keep it clean? Then you move up the the chain to a place where you're deciding what the new thing to build is going to be. You're working with the client to help them decide what you're going to build next. Why should you even do what is the right way to do it? What's the right way to go about it? And get into either, things like application architecture or user experience design or whatever. It's just like planning stuff. Like, hey, here's a vision of the future that might be nice. How would we go about it? Oh, we'll probably go like this. And then out of that would come some plan that you or someone else would implement. And if the way to do that sounds very similar to what you kind of described there, where what I suggest to them is, first of all, look for any opportunity. If anybody ever asks you for your opinion, which is actually pretty rare in a situation like this, but if someone does ask you for your opinion, pays very special attention to that. And especially if it's not specifically about what you're working on. So if somebody says, hey, I know this isn't part of what you're doing, but we're thinking about releasing this new thing, and we know you understand network security or something like that. Would you mind jumping into a meeting with the CEO and just talking it out, just kind of brainstorm for, a half hour with you? Don't get all like, oh yeah, well, that's going to cost you my hourly rate. No, that's an opportunity for you. You say yes. You do not talk about money. You go to that meeting and you be as smart as humanly possible. You ask smart questions. You push back. You test their assumptions. You be a consultant, and that doing that more and more will help kind of get you out of the friend zone, as I call it. Because it's hard to get out of the friend zone, right? Like, they need to start seeing you in a different way. And if you have any hope of moving from this sort of maintenance or implementation level of the operation up to more of a strategic level of the operation, they need to view you in a different way. And the way to do that is to do it, to actually give them good advice, to ask them smart questions, and to point them in the right direction. And, worrying about being on the clock or off the clock in a situation like that is completely missing the point.
Yeah. I like the friend zone terminology there. It is one of the hardest things, in watching both people consult with organizations and work for them. If you're in kind of implementation world, getting people in leadership positions to listen to you is a hard thing to do. So I would absolutely agree that you want to jump at any opportunity like that. And then the phrase in sports is, I hear announcers say when a player scores a touchdown and does a dance, act like you've been there before. If you immediately start quoting the CEO your hourly rate, it doesn't seem like you've been there before.
Yeah, good point.
Well, I mean, I totally hear what you're saying, and it seems to ring true with me. At the same time, I know that there are a lot of companies that are, keeping IT staff in-house, and I even sort of thought that was happening more and more. Am I missing that trend? I just feel like there are far few agencies. I've been doing web stuff now for over 20 years. I guess I really don't do it that much anymore. I do mostly training, but there was a period of time when everyone and their brother was starting up an agency, and everyone was and everyone was using agencies. And then it felt like it sort of died back a bit, but it could just be my perception that we're anticipating a wave. Or anyway, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, as I was writing the book, my sense was that this would be something you'd see over the course of, say, a decade. So what I imagine is that, it seems like all things in the IT world, that there's going to be a pendulum that's swinging. So everybody tries to ship software labor overseas. That creates all sorts of problems. So everybody brings it back onshore, back and forth. So I can imagine some pendulum action, but I think, my prediction is, and it's possible we'll assemble a decade from now and I'll have been completely wrong, but I think that if you, adjust for the pendulum swings, this is the trend that you'll see. And I don't, let's see, in the year or so since releasing it, I don't have any data specifically. It might be an interesting thing to go do some research and, see if there's someone out there compiling statistics on, what employment rates are versus the number of agencies and the people employed by them. So a lot of this is based on my travels and experience, what I think will happen. But I'm not entirely sure what will.
There's another sort of, I feel like things like Upwork and Fiverr and 99 Designs and those sort of marketplaces are kind of muddy the waters about your question, Reuven, and other things like GitHub and Stack Overflow, where the barrier to entry it seems like it's lower than ever, and to find really, I don't want to like throw everybody under the bus and say it's all low quality talent, but it's certainly the closest thing to commodity labor that I can think of in the space. You just go to whatever, you go to Upwork, you do a search, you sort ascending by hourly rate, and you go to the spot that you feel comfortable, and you look around at a few of their reviews or whatever. And so I feel like I don't see I can't articulate exactly how that exactly would impact the difference between, I want to be an in-house developer, or I am an in-house developer, versus I'm going to start an agency. I feel like it's like a brand new third option. It's like a wild card that is affecting perhaps the pendulum swing of where, maybe the pendulum's not going back and forth. Maybe it's going around in a circle between those three options.
Yeah, that's a good point. If I were thinking of this and how I'd try to categorize it, you've got, I guess, like individual contractors that are sort of the closest thing you've got to a commodity. Then you might have these kind of tiny firms. Like I know some people that were working at these enterprises and broke off to form these little agencies of 2-3 people. And then you've got, progressively larger agencies. So I don't have a ton of opinion among those groups of people where it's all going to shake out. I do have the feeling that it will be among those groups and out of the big sort of traditional enterprises.
Now, could it be, and I'm curious here, I'm not just like trying to play devil's advocate, could it be that, because you're describing sort of in some ways an ideal software world in which knowledge workers are treated well and they get to make their own decisions. Could it be that not all businesses want that, or that there's room for programmers who just sort of are less creative, less value-based?
When you say not all businesses want that, you mean that they would just rather have sort of a traditional command and control Taylor-esque structure?
Yeah.
So the trouble I see with that is I've worked with a lot of organizations that's really in their DNA, and those are the ones that tend to have trouble with it. So I think collectively, at least for the time being, and I'd say the foreseeable future, software developers as a unit have enough leverage that Taylor-esque corporations are going to have a hard time dictating to them what their working conditions should be. Obviously, that won't apply to every individual developer. You might get, the aforementioned person that would just want to sit in their cave, and maybe they don't care too much about their wage or what have you. And you do see people like that, wind up at some stodgy old institution for 20 years. So, I think there's a place for that. I just think the trend will move away from it.
And man, what a horribly, what am I trying to say here? To me, the reason to have like a corporate job like that, an in-house job, is that you can just focus on your one thing. You can just be you don't have to have like all of these other business skills. You don't have to think about that. You don't have to think about sales or setting up nothing. You can just focus on whatever JavaScript, whatever you do, Java. But that seems like, so it's like, and it's like security, like the check comes every month. But to me, that is such a scary position to be in. Like maybe it's just my personality, because I would love it if I could just do the favorite parts of my job all day long and just money would just appear every month. That'd be cool. But it just scares me to death to imagine how interchangeable that is, how the slightest thing could, you're almost by definition, if you're that type, you're almost by definition hard to get along with, or at least not friendly. And
I think there's a huge number of jobs though where that's what people have, and they are happy with that stability.
But those are the jobs that get outsourced. Like we are sick of this guy,
right?
and we're paying him a ton of money because salaries, it's like cost of living increases even. It starts to add up, and like, what does this guy even do? It just, to me, it's like a horrible, it's probably just my personality that I'm sure there are tons of people that are super cool with it and they're friendly as anything. And they, but man, like that would feel so risky to me. Like if I was back at Staples, and I know these dudes, I worked with them. And as soon as there was a downsize, they were the first people to go.
I think your description is apt about like they're not about them not being friendly, but like they'd be the first people to go because they have the most easily transferable skills to other people, or commoditized skills.
Yeah.
But I remember in like 2008, I remember saying to my accountant, because like here in Israel, as well as many other places, there were a lot of layoffs happening. I said to my accountant, boy, I'm a little nervous about my consulting work because like they're going to be all these layoffs from high tech. And suddenly I'm going to have all this competition. And he said, are you nuts? He said, no one wants to be a freelancer if they've been used to a corporate job for a long time. They want that stability. They are more than happy. People are willing to accept a lot of things as normal. And I see it as crazy that I have to ask someone else, like, can I take a vacation? Right. But like, I got really upset with my PhD advisor when I needed to get his approval to take vacation time. And yet many people are totally okay with that.
But are they developers? So
yeah,
like,
there are plenty of corporate developers. When I worked at HP, I remember them telling me that there were a lot of people who went away, like from like they came to HP in their 20s after college, and then they went away to work at other companies, like at startups, like their 30s, and then they came back in their 40s because they were willing to make less and have less excitement and have less job growth for the stability.
Oh, fair enough, but I'm not saying those people don't exist, but it is. I know from plenty of anecdotal information that lots of companies are desperate to hire developers and they can't do it. So I think that kind of like maybe those people exist, but there aren't enough of them.
Fair enough.
They also, in what I've seen, a lot of them will settle into this sort of weird codependent relationship with the company where they're really facile on some aging tech stack like COBOL or early, enterprise Java kind of things, like legacy stuff that's sitting around, where I've actually helped some organizations who try to modernize simply because the only people that could work on the tech they had were aging out of the workforce. So I think you'll see this kind of, I think of it as codependent, like the employer-employee are sort of mutually unhappy with one another, but it's predictable for both of them. So they, live their lives.
Right.
Yeah, I see that happening a lot too, where the people who are internal, they feel like, the pile of code that's grown up over the 10 years that they've been there is like their baby and nobody else can touch it. And it's the problem, and it's this sort of legacy code base, and maybe it works okay, but there's a tendency, and I think it's pretty common, I don't think it's just my skewed viewpoint, that those legacy code bases are actually they're usually developed during, maybe in the 90s, so like pre like first internet bubble, and therefore are not built in the way that sort of modern software is built, and is holding them back from being able to do things in a more, release new features more quickly and be more competitive in the marketplace. So it's kind of like a lot of legacy. Let's say you're sort of the curator of the legacy code base. When that gets outsourced to Fiserv, you're gone, dude. It's like,
yeah,
right.
That is, it has a lot of security for years, even decades, right up till the moment it doesn't. Because a lot of the consulting I've been involved in over the years is strategizing about how to get out from under this situation. So if you've got, 4 of your 6 Delphi developers or whatever aging out of the workforce, for those other 2, when the company finally decides to do something about it, that's going to be a whole lot of upheaval.
Yeah, and I've known people that have kind of been stuck working on these types of legacy systems who have finally just gotten enough and said, one particular example, I had a friend who worked at a place where they would try to deploy features every 6 months. And when they did that, it was just a hair on fire. Everybody's staying up all night to get this thing out the door because they never deployed with any regularity, so they didn't have good processes around it. And the whole thing was just this really terrible situation. And, he's seeing people talk about continuous deployment and deploying 4 times a day. And, he finally just decided, I want some of that. That's what I want to do. I cannot deal with this crap any longer. I'm out of here. And that kind of triggered like a big mass exodus at this place because everybody else kind of realized, oh yeah, just the environment and the culture here sucks. We want to get out and, do new things instead of being stuck maintaining this 90s era ball of mud.
Well, Reuven, you work with your customers obviously have lots of developers on staff. So would you say that your are they mostly like super duper tech focused companies that we're writing software as a core competency for the business, or is it mostly?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like I was just trying to think that now, and they're all technology companies in some way or another. Where I worked with this company recently. I gave them a course where like they do software for dental offices. So like, granted, like a lot of the people who work there are not software people. And it was a surprisingly small group of software engineers working on this product, but they were still like, they were still central to the company and what it's doing.
So what's the takeaway for the listener? So the listener is either a freelancer or is thinking about becoming one soon. So what would you say, Eric, to that group of people who, what are the trends that they should watch out for? What are the things they can do to ride this wave that you predict?
So I guess in the broadest of terms, I would say that I think you're going to see a rise in the so-called gig economy, and I think you are going to see this exodus. So whatever you might want to do, however risk averse you are or where you feel you're best suited, I would recommend at least being aware of this trend and understanding what it means for you, which I would say is to become more business savvy and more well-rounded, and to stop thinking of employers as these custodians of your career, that you have to take that on for yourself, because it's if this comes, even if you want to be an employee, you're going to have work that tends to be a lot more transactional, which might mean that you have to search for more jobs or that you're going to have more turnover around you. So I think you need to start thinking of yourself as your own business of one, whether you act on that in the legal sense or not. Killer.
Very good.
Yeah, totally agree.
All right. Well, I think that's a great place for us to stop talking about this and move on to picks. Eric, did you bring any picks with you this week? Did we tell you about picks?
Oh, I think I probably know the drill. I actually do a weekly column on my blog where I'll do some picks. Let's see. One of the ones I'd offer is because I'm location independent, I use this new service that we just got called Post Scan Mail. You can have them send mail to this physical address, and this company will scan it in and send it to you as an email document when we're on the road. That's how I manage my mail. And I guess I can cop out by, given the nature of the discussion, making another pick, my book, Developer Hegemony.
Very nice. And people can find that on Amazon?
Yeah, it is on Amazon.
It's a real book or an ebook, or not to disparage ebook authors.
Hey.
On the panel here. Yes.
Come on.
There, you can get it as both a print copy and an ebook.
Much more deftly said. Good. Jeremy, got any picks for us this week?
I do. I have an email course that I offer through one of my products, Remark, that is aimed at helping consultants and freelancers do things that will help them increase their fees by demonstrating more value to their clients. You can find it at increaseyourconsultingfees.com, and that will redirect you to the right place.
Excellent. And I assume the advice is not add a zero to the end. It's a little more sophisticated than that.
It's a little more sophisticated than that, but that's kind of one of the end goals that we're getting at.
Excellent. Jonathan, what you got?
This week I am going to pick the Dyson V8 cordless vacuum. We have pets and have to vacuum basically every day, and lugging like a bigger plug-in vacuum out of the closet and setting it up and assembling so we end up not vacuuming as much as we probably should. So Dyson vacuums are on the pricey side, I think, but man, it is really, really good. So if you have pets and you don't want your socks to look like mohair, then this is definitely like this is where it's at. It's super light. It's really powerful. The battery lasts long enough to do like the entire floor, of like a good sized house. It's really nice, and it's just great. Just grab it, boop boop boop, and put it back. Super cool. Big fan. Yeah, so I can highly recommend that. And as usual, I will pick my email course, valuepricingbootcamp.com. You can go there to find out. Actually, it's reasonably related to today's topic about not being a commodity, changing the way you price, not billing by the hour, and coming up with other ways to present yourself to your clients in a way that will be more valuable to them, and therefore you can charge more money. So you can check that out at valuepricingbootcamp.com.
Excellent. So for me, listeners of the podcast know that I'm interested in politics and history and podcasts. So there's been a lot of talk, I don't know why, over the last year or so about Watergate and Nixon and resignations and so forth. And so now the thing is, I was really too young during Watergate to remember anything. The fact that I actually was alive during that time, I guess, sets me apart from most of our listeners, but an increasing number of my clients, but I digress. In any event, so the thing is, we tend to think of news in the modern way of it's just this torrent of stuff coming out all the time. Imagine, though, during the early 70s, you got your news on the radio and TV and the newspaper, but it worked way, way, way more slowly just for things to come out. So there's this fantastic podcast called Slow Burn from Slate, where it's, I think, 8 parts, 10 parts, something like that, of what was it like to live through Watergate? And what were the personalities, and what was it like on TV, and what was it like to sort of get your news fix once a day at most? And they talk about the personalities, they talk about how it plays out, and I have found it to be absolutely fascinating and fun to listen to, and way beyond the, I am not a crook, and then resignation of Nixon and all the stuff beyond that. So highly, highly recommended. And with that, I guess we get to the end of the show. Eric, thank you so much for joining us. This was fantastic.
Thank you for having me.
And as usual, Jeremy and Jonathan, thank you.
Cheers.
So long.
And thank you to all of our listeners out there. And we will see you next week on the Freelancer Show. I don't know where that was.
What was that?
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.